Chapter 10 of The Duke of Chimney Butte. This Box recording is in the public domain. The Duke of Chimney Butte by G.W. Ogden. Chapter 10. Guests of the Boss Lady. Vesta rode out to meet them as they were coming back, to make sure of her thanks. She was radiant with gratitude, and at no loss any longer for words to express it. Before they had ridden together on the return journey half a mile, Taterleg felt that he had known her all her life, and was ready to cast his fortunes with her, win or lose. Lambert was leaving the conversation between her and Taterleg for the greater part. He rode in gloomy isolation, like a man with something on his mind, speaking only when spoken to, and then as shortly as politeness would permit. Taterleg, who had words enough for a book, appeared to feel the responsibility of holding them up to the level of gentlemen and citizens of the world. Not if talk could prevent it would Taterleg allow them to be classed as a pair of boors who could not go beyond the ordinary cowpuncher's range in word and thought. "It'll be some time, ma'am, before that feller Hargus and his boy'll try to make a short cut to Glendora through your ranch again," he said. It was the first time they were ever caught after old man Hargus had been cutting our fence for years, Mr. Wilson. I can't tell you how much I owe you for humiliating them where they thought the humiliation would be on my side. Don't you mention it, ma'am. It's the greatest pleasure in the world. He thought he'd come by the house and look in the window and defy me because I was alone. Got a mean eyes. You've got an eye like the wolf. He's got a wolf's habits, too, in more ways than one, Mr. Wilson. Yes, that man would steal calves, all right. We've never been able to prove it on him, Mr. Wilson, but you've put your finger on Mr. Hargus's weakness like a phrenologist. Taterleg felt his oats at this compliment. He sat up like a major, his chest out, his mustache as big on his thin face as a Marmaluke's. It always made Lambert think of the handlebars on that long-horn safety bicycle that he had come riding into the Badlands. The worst part of it is, Mr. Wilson, that he's not the only one. Neighbors living off you, are they? Yes, that's the way it was down in Texas when the big ranchers began to fence, they tell me. I never was there, ma'am, and I don't know of my own knowledge and belief, as lawyers say. Fence riding down there in them days was a job where a man took his life in both hands and held it up to be shot at. There's been an endless fight on this ranch, too. It's been a strain and a struggle from the first day. Not worth it, not half worth it, but Father put the best years of his life into it and established it where men boasted it couldn't be done. I'm not going to let them whip me now. Lambert looked at her with a quick gleam of admiration in his eyes. She was riding between him and Taterleg, as easy in their company and as natural as if she had known them for years. There had been no heights of false pride or consequence for her to descend to the comradeship of these men, for she was as unaffected and ingenuous as they. Lambert seemed to wake to a sudden realization of this. His interest in her began to grow, his reserve to fall away. "They told us at Glendora that rustlers were running your cattle off," he said. "Are they taking the stragglers that get to where the fence is cut, or coming after them?" "They're coming in and running them off almost under our eyes. I've only got one man on the ranch besides Ananias. Nobody riding fence at all but myself. It takes me a good while to ride nearly 70 miles of fence." "Yes, that's so," Lambert seemed to reflect. "How many head have you got in this pasture?" "I ought to have about 4,000, but they're melting away like snow, Mr. Lambert." "We saw a bunch of 'em up there where the fellers cut the fence," Taterleg put in, not to be left out of the game which he had started and kept going single-handed so long, white-faced cattle like they got in Kansas. Mine are all white-faced. They stand this climate better than others." "Must have been a bunch of strays we saw, and none of them was branded," Lambert said. Father never would brand his calves, for various reasons, the humane above all others. I never blamed him after seeing it done once, and I'm not going to take up the barbarous practice now. All other considerations aside, it ruins the hide, you know, Mr. Lambert." "Seems to me you'd be better to lose the hide than the calf, Miss Philbrook." "It does make it easy for thieves, and that's the only argument in favor of branding. While I've got the only white-faced herd in this country, I can't go into court and prove my property without a brand once the cattle are run outside this fence. So they come in and take them, knowing they're safe unless they're caught." Lambert fell silent again. The ranch house was in sight, high on its peninsula of prairie, like a lighthouse seen from sea. "It's a shame to let that fine herd waste away like that," he said ruminatively, as if speaking to himself. "It's always been hard to get help here. Cowboys seem to think it's a disgrace to ride fence. Such as we've been able to get nearly always turned out thieves on their own account in the end. The one out with the cattle now is a farm boy from Iowa, afraid of his shadow. They didn't want no fence in here in the first place. That's what set their teeth agin you," Taterleg said. "If I could only get some real men once," she sighed. "Men who could handle them like you boys did this morning. Even Father never seemed to understand where to take hold of them to hurt them the way you do." They were near the house now. Lambert rode on a little way in silence. Then, "It's a shame to let that herd go to pieces," he said. "It's a sin," Taterleg declared. She dropped her reins, looking from one to the other, an eager appeal in her hopeful face. "Why can't you boys stop here a while and help me out?" she asked, saying at last in a burst of hopeful eagerness to say what had been in her heart at first. She held out her hand to each of them in a pretty way of appeal, turning from one to the other, her gray eyes pleading. "I hate to see a herd like that broken up by thieves and all your investment wasted," said the Duke thoughtfully, as if considering it deeply. "It's a sin and shame," said Taterleg. "I guess we'll stay and give you a hand," said the Duke. She pulled her horse up short and gave him not a figurative hand, but a warm, a soft, material one from which she pulled her buckskin glove as if to level all thought or suggestion of a barrier between them. She turned then and shook hands with Taterleg, warming him so with her glowing eyes that he patted her hand a little before he let it go, in a manner truly patriarchal. "You're all right. You're all right," he said. Once pledged to it, the Duke was anxious to set his hand to the work that he saw cut out for him on the big ranch. He was like a physician who had entered reluctantly into a case after the other practitioners had left the patient in desperate condition. Every moment must be employed if disaster to that valuable herd was to be averted. Vesta would hear of nothing but that they come first to her house for dinner. So the guests did the best they could at improving their appearance at the bunkhouse after turning their horses over to the obsequious Ananias, who appeared with a large bandage and a strong smell of turpentine on his bruised head. Beyond brushing off the dust of the morning's ride, there was little to be done. Taterleg brought out his brightest necktie from the portable possessions rolled up in his slicker. The Duke produced his calfskin vest. There was not a coat between them to save the dignity of their profession at the boss lady's board. Taterleg's green velvet waistcoat had suffered damage during the winter when a spark from his pipe burned a hole in it as big as $1. He held it up and looked at it, concluding in the end it would not serve. With his hairy chaps off, Taterleg did not appear so bow-legged, but he waddled like a crab as they went toward the house to join the companion of their ride. The Duke stopped on the high ground near the house, turned and looked off over the great pasture that had been Philbrook's battleground for so many years. One farmer from Iowa out there to watch 4,000 cattle and thieves all around him. Eatin' looks like burning daylight to me. She'd have felt hurt if we'd shied off from her dinner, Duke. You know a man's got to eat when he ain't hungry and drink when he ain't dry sometimes in this world to keep up appearances. Appearances. The Duke looked him over with humorous eye, from his somewhat clean sombrero to his capacious corduroy trousers gathered into his boot tops. "Oh, well, I guess it's all right." Vesta was in excellent spirits, due to the broadening of her prospects, which had appeared so narrow and uncompromising but a few hours before.